All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Wednesday, March 25th, 2020 City Council meeting agenda, City of Burlingame Council meeting. We are having a special meeting this evening in relation, of course, to all an update going on with COVID-19 throughout the region. And at this point, I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:01 p.m. Before we go to our next agenda item, we wanted to pass it over to our city clerk, Megan, so she can go ahead and explain how folks viewing from home can participate in the meeting and offer public comment as well. So Megan.
Sure, yeah, we have no members of the public yet really in here, but if you do want to comment, feel free to email in your questions or your comments to publiccomment@burlingame.org. You can also always use the chat feature on this, on Zoom. It's at the bottom of your screen and you can just chat me a message. And your other option is if you go at the bottom of your screen under participants or more next to participants, it'll allow you to raise your hand, which will alert me that you have a comment.
All right, thank you for that explanation, Megan. At this time, we are going to rise in our homes, and Megan is going to help us with a visual for a flag, and we will do our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Megan, if you could help us with the roll call.
Councilmember Coulson? Here.
Here.
Councilmember Conrig?
Here.
Councilmember Ortiz?
Here.
Vice Mayor O'Brien?
Here.
Mayor Beach?
Here. Thank you, Madam City Clerk. Item number 4 are public comments that are not on the agenda. So members of public at this time may speak on any item that we won't be discussing tonight. And if you'd wish to suggest an item for a future council meeting, you can do that as well during the public comment period. The Brown Act, which governs how we operate at City Council, prohibits the City Council from acting on any matter that is not on the agenda this evening. So Madam City Clerk, do we have any members of the public with a non-agenda comment?
No, there are no comments at this time.
Okay, seeing none, we will move on. Before we go on to staff reports, I just wanted to thank all of our staff for doing an amazing job keeping the city running right now and humming along, being so responsive to constituent inquiries. Colleagues are doing a great job at that as well. And this is our first official city council meeting where we're operating via virtual Zoom video conferencing. So thanks for your patience as we work through the technical, getting used to all the technical differences and how we normally operate, but we're going to do the best we can. On to item number 5, our first staff report and communication. We're going to turn it over to the city manager, Lisa Goldman, and our city attorney, Kathleen Kane, for an update on COVID-19, the public health emergency, and a number of measures we'll be discussing tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. I feel like we all just saw each other virtually last night. But we do have a few more updates since yesterday's town hall. Thank you all for participating in that. Just a little background, although we've all been living and breathing COVID-19 for over a week now, just to set up the stage, back on March 4th, Governor Newsom proclaimed a state of emergency as a result of the threat of COVID-19. A week later, on the 11th, the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus outbreak a pandemic. San Mateo County Board of Supervisors voted the day before on March 10th, to ratify their declaration of a local health emergency and a proclamation of a local emergency. Then we declared our own local emergency at our council meeting on March 16th. We did that special meeting at the end of the regular council meeting. Also that day, when we prepared the staff report for the 16th, we didn't know that just a couple days later, the health officers for 6 Bay Area counties, including our own, would issue very strict shelter-in-place orders in order to try to slow the spread of COVID-19. And so we all went into lockdown at midnight that night. And that order is attached to your staff report. And then Governor Newsom issued a similar but not exactly the same order, a stay-at-home order on March 19th. That is also attached to your staff report. Other items of note on March 24th, so just yesterday morning, the County Board of Supervisors adopted a resolution establishing a temporary countywide moratorium on eviction for non-payment of rent by residential tenants directly impacted by the pandemic. So if you have been a bad actor or there's other reasons for you to be evicted, those can still go forward. But if it is related to your loss of your job or significant impact on your income and you can't pay your rent, there is that moratorium. They also adopted a resolution authorizing the donation of $3 million in Measure K funds to the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. This is for a new fund they started called SMC Strong, and that I plugged quite a bit last night at our town hall. It is for individuals and families, nonprofit organizations, and small businesses adversely impacted. I actually went on and made my donation today, and you can do the drop-down menu. Thank you, Councilmember Colson. You can do a drop-down menu and choose where the money goes, or you can just send it all and let them figure out where the greatest need is. So I wanted to give a couple more updates that aren't in your staff report, but are sort of late breaking news, and then I'll go back to the staff report. So we did have our wonderful town hall last night. Thank you to Megan for figuring out that technology. It was not easy, and she did a great job playing air traffic control. We do have the link on our website, and we will send that out, I think, in our next e-newsletter, but you can find it. It's actually been posted a couple different places, and it's through the city clerk's page, or if you just go onto our burlingame.org website and type in virtual town hall, you can find it. So you can see all of us and people. It's kind of funny. You can see the Brady Bunch style. So some people are drinking wine and some people are knitting and some of us are answering questions, and it's kind of a hoot to watch. I went back through and checked it out. So Megan is also working on making our future meetings tonight and in the future. They'll all be virtual and for the foreseeable future, but looking into how to make them more accessible. So they'll be going to YouTube and Penn TV so that people who normally would watch us on our website and can't do that right now, they can find it on YouTube. In the area of childcare, that was something that we heard quite a bit from our hospital. Peninsula Hospital is really struggling with what to do for childcare services for their emergency personnel, because people are working these crazy hours and yet their kids are home from school, and now their kids are going to be home from school another month. So Margaret and Dina over in Fire are working to find not only childcare for medical personnel, but also our first responders. They should be having,
sorry,
I'm sorry?
Lisa, Councilmember Brownrigg has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're muted, Councilmember Brownrigg.
Oh, thanks. I was waiting till the end, Lisa, but I just didn't want to forget. I just wanted to point out, because we're new to the protocol, sometimes I think it's said that, mute yourself because otherwise, you'll be on the video screen. And in fact, as we all know, you're always on the video screen, just on the big screen. So one does need to be careful, apropos of your earlier comments about people knitting and drinking wine, that you are constantly visible if you have your feed on.
Unless you
press
the thing to hide the video, and then you just have your avatar, whatever that may be.
That's right. So just in terms of video conference protocol, one wants to remember that one is always visible.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry. Thanks.
That's okay. Wreck my flow here. That's all right. So we should have an announcement soon about, we're also working with the Child Care Coordinating Council. So we hope to have some good news. The school district, Burlingame School District, has stepped up in this arena as well. So that has been something that the hospital staff was really quite concerned about late last week. And the county didn't have any answers. We didn't have any answers at the beginning, but kudos to Margaret and Dina for working through that. Given that this shutdown looks like it's going to be lasting a whole lot longer than we originally anticipated based on what's going on with the schools, they're extending. So I suspect that the county will extend the order that applies to all of us. Community development is looking into how they can ramp up the intake of plans. You'll recall that the county order allows for housing to continue. And so we haven't had a whole lot of staff to do all of that, but we are looking at how we can take in plans electronically, still have people work remotely and be able to process things. There will be some things we just can't do, but we are trying to increase our service in the area of housing. Commercial is still off the table. Let's see, Public Works just today reported out that they're seeing an increase in calls for service for sewer lateral tests and encroachment permits. Again, skeleton staff, they're doing their best to accommodate. Police is getting some calls complaining about violations of the shelter-in-place order, more yesterday than today. And then one thing that Mayor Beach learned today is that Sephora's national office has ordered all their stores to board up their windows to prevent looting, which is a terrifying thought, but probably happening some places. So we will see that at the Sephora in downtown Burlingame, which is not what we would love to see. They did promise to make it look attractive, but I don't know what that will be.
Mayor O'Brien has a question for you.
Sure.
Thank you.
In regards to the child care, there is the coordinator of Child Care Partnership Council who actually had to talk to today on child care issues. And so I do have a contact person at the coordinating council if you need it.
I'll have Margaret's on the Zoom right now, so I'm sure she is paying attention. They do have someone. Oh, there she is.
Yeah, if you could shoot that to me, Anne, that would be helpful because I have a call tomorrow and Friday.
Okay, perfect. I'll email you.
Thank
Nice,
you.
Mayor O'Brien. Thank you. We'll be a little formal, even though it's a weird setup. So with that, let me go back to our staff report. I will send you all, council members, my normal daily update, which I did not send yesterday because you heard it all on the call, on the Zoom town hall, but you will get an update that also has the report outs that we got from the county in case you were not able to be on their meeting earlier today. Our meetings for the city managers are going to Monday, Wednesday, Friday only, so I will have less information to share with you on Tuesdays and Thursdays going forward. So with that, back to the staff report. There were a couple things that we wanted to actually get some direction and action on, and I will take care of the first two, and then I'll ask Kathleen to jump in on the third one. So the first one at the March 16th council meeting when all of this was still a little bit new, and that was only a week ago, a week and a couple days ago. You talked about providing $30,000 in funding for organizations that will assist the Burlingame community during this public health emergency. That's before we knew about SMC Strong, but I think it's probably something you still would like to do. You had mentioned your interest in contributing to Samaritan House and to Call Primrose. So Samaritan House, there's several core services agency that the county has designated, and they have geographic regions. So for our geographic regions in the center of the county, Samaritan House is our agency, and so that's where people go if they need to access housing and all sorts of other services. And so Samaritan House was one, and we do already provide funding for Samaritan House in a variety of ways. You did extra funding at the end of last calendar year for renters, and then you give money through your community groups funding during the budget process. So that was one that you talked about giving money to. And then the other one is Call Primrose, which you know is based here in Burlingame. And they provide free groceries to low-income individuals. I'm sure they're getting quite a bit more activity than they normally do. People are really struggling right now. So what we're hoping for, before I go on to the next one, is just some direction about whether $30,000 is the right amount. And that is, that could be the right amount for right now. And then we talk about additional funding for other types of programs in the future. That's what we have on the table right now. And then do you want to, at the time you had talked about maybe 5 or 10 to Call Primrose and the rest to Samaritan House, but I just wanted to get a little bit more direction because I don't think we had full consensus on where you thought, how we should break that funding. So I'll stop talking and put myself on mute for a sec and see what you'd like to do.
All right, so with that, if whoever would like to start first, either with some questions on this, I see that Councilmember Coulson has her hand raised, so let's turn it over.
I just have a question, Lisa. When I put the donation through for San Mateo County Strong, you could pick, like, did you want it to be a resident? Did you want it to be a nonprofit or a small business donation, or just give it discretionary? But there was nothing about regional or city. Are there any plans? I don't believe they've figured out how to do that, and it's all just going to the region. And then Samaritan House will be figuring out how to help the individuals, families, and nonprofits. And then Samsita is working on a process for the business community, for the small business grants. And they actually, in my update for you tonight, we learned today that the application for the small businesses should be out next week, hopefully. I don't know how people will access yet the funds for the individuals or the nonprofits.
Okay, so I guess the question then becomes, will they have like if we were to take even some of this money or add more, and I think Councilman Brownrigg and I are gonna talk to Roseanne Faust tomorrow and see what the process is so we can think in a larger context. So I just wanted to lay that out in case that made a difference to how people think about this 30,000.
Right, and this is just our initial,
first
at something. I suspect that the council will want to do some larger something, a program of some kind, but we haven't had an opportunity to think through what that looks like yet. And so this is just our first sort of emergency infusion of dollars into two nonprofits that we have good experience with and that do work in our community. So that's why we're just on that right now. And then based on our conversation the other day that Councilmembers Colson and Brownrigg and I had with the finance director, you will be chatting with Ms. Faust about business support, and then there may be another opportunity for us to also do something to help individuals and nonprofits. But this is really just our initial kind of emergency stopgap, something kind of a good faith effort.
I think that's an important question and an important context, because there will be a lot of asks and a lot of opportunities where we'll need to think about how we deploy resources. Other colleagues with a question, Councilmember Ortiz.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And so I'm just curious, where would these funds come from? And my comment on 30,000 seemed really adequate about a week and a half ago. It just doesn't seem like it's anywhere near enough today. So I would be in favor of considering a higher amount, and also curious to know where these funds would be coming from.
So we have unassigned fund balance, so they can come out of unassigned fund balance. We have sufficient monies there, quite a bit of monies there. Not that we want to spend them all right now, but that would be my suggestion. And then, a larger something, we would have to look at how we fund that and do a, more thorough analysis.
Other questions from colleagues before we open up to members of the public? Okay, seeing none. Madam City Clerk, do we have any public members that would like to comment on this issue?
There are no members, or there are no comments from the public.
Okay. All right. Then seeing that, I just, one other kind of context setup, I hear Councilmember Ortiz's comment as well that, obviously this has just become, and since the last time we met and discussed this, the whole world continues to change day by day. Another thing that occurred to me, which really isn't a topic for tonight, but on the realm of all different needs, we've talked for a while about even how to deploy eventually when we have our affordable housing funds to help with emergency rental assistance, whether it's for residents. It seems like a subcommittee, that might be another bucket if we have to kickstart something where we might consider deploying funds, since we don't have any, and I don't even know if that's possible, but whether or not that's something that could require additional funds as well. So we've got immediate sort of short-term charitable needs. We've got a subcommittee of our council, which we probably should talk about as well, which is, I think, Councilmember Colson and Councilmember Brownrigg, exploring this SAMCETA thing, what business assistance might look like is really important. And then how there could be like a phase 2 and a bigger discussion. Do I see that Councilmember Brownrigg has some comments at this point?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So just a couple of comments. One, I think, and I'll leave it up to the mayor and the city manager, but my guess is for the duration of this crisis, I would be in favor of making sure we meet at least every 2 weeks, no matter how many Mondays there are in a month and the rest of it. I just think the situation is changing so quickly that it is useful for all of us to be on the same page. And this does seem like a relatively straightforward format. So I just want to endorse more communication and more ability to make decisions rather than fewer. With respect to the question on the table, I agree with Councilman Ortiz. We probably need to put more, but if we meet more frequently, then I'm less concerned because we can top up. And so I'll just speak since I have the microphone. With respect to the 30, I would be in favor of making it fairly simple. I would do 10 to Primrose and 20 to Samaritan House. But I'm very happy to support a larger number if that's the will of the council. Again, I think we can come back and top up. So that's why I'm also comfortable leaving it at 30, not that I think we're finished at that level. I do think there are more general questions about our COVID response, and I will defer to you, Madam Mayor, as to when we talk about those more general issues, whether it's at the towards the end or we do it now, or if you want to stay on working through the agenda, then we can just focus on the 30K right now. I'll leave that to you.
Yep. No, thank you for the comment. I think we should probably take the agenda items first, and I think I'll defer to the city attorney, but it seems like the agenda topic was general enough that there'll be an opportunity at the end to discuss some other things as well. Madam City Attorney, does that sound reasonable?
That's right. We deliberately kept it vague so that there would be an opportunity. This is such a fast evolving situation that there should be ample opportunity to talk about broader COVID response issues as well.
Okay, so we have Councilmember Brownrigg suggesting as a phase 1, and that's important, phase 1, potentially doing 10,000 to Call Primrose, 20,000 to Samaritan House, and I see Vice Mayor O'Brien has a comment, so we'll turn it over to her.
I would agree with Councilmember Brownrigg. I do think we should probably keep track of our constituents that are sending us their needs, or they may be phoning council members and or city manager, that maybe we keep track of what those needs are too, because that may help us make our decisions futuristically if we are going to be utilizing more money for those needs. It'd be nice to know what those needs are right now in Burlingame, and then we can address them at that time. I do like the idea of just kind of talking about this every 2 weeks, because this is changing on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. It seems to me that there will be some kind of interest, whether it's, or at least I sense with, that there's going to be an interest in some kind of business support, whether probably through SMC Strong, but it sounds like we need to do a little bit more legwork on that first. Is that what colleagues are sensing? I can't see all of you in the Brady Bunch video screen right now, but does anybody concur with that, Vice Mayor?
Yeah, so they are actually working on that application right now, so we're going to have a much better idea next week. So if I hear that information, I will relay it to you and the city manager.
Okay, thanks. All right. Yes, Councilmember Brownrigg.
Thanks. Just on that point about support, I do think it's important for us, and again, this probably will come up later in the meeting, so I don't mind deferring to that, but I do think my instinct is we should have a Burlingame specific response. I appreciate. We will learn more about SMC Strong tomorrow, and maybe that's the right vehicle. But I think showing confidence to our merchants and our businesses is going to be important. And I think it gets, potentially the message and the symbolism, quite honestly, get lost if we flow it all through SMC Strong. So I just want to put a flag out there that I think we may want to look at a tailored domestic response here for our business community. And there may be different, there are different things that we can do, but again, I'll hold back on how to get to that point. But since you asked the question, that's my instinct.
Yeah, I appreciate the comment. I think, and I think there is a lot more research to be done on that, but I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't momentum that we should include SMC Strong at this point in phase 1. I think it sounds like we might need a little bit more information first. And I see Councilmember Coulson has her hand up, so.
Thanks. So yes, I want to concur with Councilman Brownrigg. I think that it's going to be a layered response that we're going to need to do. And hopefully he and I will know tomorrow more if we can unitize in any way the fund. In other words, because the other problem, Michael, is that if we can pair up with community members that want to donate, I'm hearing from a lot of people, like, how do we donate? How do we support? We're not a 501(c), so it's hard for us to take donations in. So if we can work with Roseanne so that donations can come in, people can get their tax write-off, and then we can almost unitize or somehow keep that money truncated into a special Burlingame account, then that will help us figure out how to administer it, get, letters get written out, IRS stuff, and then come back so it doesn't burden our own staff too much. So, then layering on simple things we can do. So
yeah, I think there's a robust conversation ahead of us, but it sounds like we're not ready to make a donation to SMC Strong at this point. So I appreciate colleagues' comments on that. Does anybody have any other suggestions before we take a vote on 10,000 or we could entertain a motion for 10,000 to Call Primrose and 20,000 to Samaritan House as a phase 1 approach to charitable philanthropic giving at this time? Okay, if not, would someone like to make the motion?
So moved.
All right, by Councilmember Brownrigg. Do I have a second? By hand raise? Or I see Vice Mayor O'Brien is seconding that. All in favor?
Aye.
So you actually need to do a roll call vote since we are doing this
Thank you.
remotely. I don't see Councilmember Ortiz on here anymore. Did we lose him? He might have bounced out somehow.
Okay, we should probably wait on the vote then for him to be available. And thank you for correcting me. I thought it was just resolutions, but I'm glad, yes, when we are doing a video conference, we should be roll call vote for everything. Any other comments on the motion? No? Okay, then Madam City Attorney, what do you recommend?
Oh, he's back.
He's connecting to audio.
There he is. So
right.
I'll defer to Mayor Beach just to go over what our motion is, and maybe we can just knock this one out.
All right, sure thing. Hi, Councilmember Ortiz. We have a motion on the table that Councilmember Brownrigg made for 10,000 to Call Primrose, 20,000 to Samaritan House as a phase 1 approach to philanthropic giving at this time of urgency for COVID-19. And then it was seconded by the Vice Mayor, and we're going to do a roll call vote at this time, unless you have any other comments on the motion.
No, I'm fine.
All right, so we'll turn it over to Madam City Clerk.
Councilmember Coulson,
aye.
Councilmember Brownrigg,
Aye.
Councilmember Ortiz,
Aye.
Vice Mayor O'Brien,
Aye.
Mayor Beach.
Aye. All right, sounds like the motion passes unanimously. Thank you, colleagues. I think we did the right thing there. So part 2 of the staff report, I think that's still to the city manager.
That is me. So this idea actually came to us from one of your constituents. who was concerned about people bringing their own bags in and handing them off to checkers to fill with groceries. So just as a reminder for those who are watching from home, and it looks like we actually have quite a few people watching from home. Back in 2013, the council adopted a program restricting the use of single-use carryout bags, and this was the San Mateo County program, and we adopted it here in Burlingame. And we actually had it go into effect on Earth Day in 2013. And so under that ordinance, everyone's well familiar, retailers must charge customers who request a single-use bag upon checkout. And that has been working well for us. I think not everybody loves it, but it has gone a long way to reducing all the bags that are flying around and into the waterways and everything else. However, given what we're dealing with right now and wanting to reduce people touching things that other people have touched, we got a request that we suspend the fee so that people don't feel this financial hit if they ask for a bag as opposed to bringing their own. So we have brought that to you as a resolution. This would just be in effect until we call it off when the emergency is over or subsiding. And so we are still wanting to be committed to our green future and as environmentally conscious as we can be. But we're just in a different time right now, and we want to respect the fact that people don't necessarily want to touch what other people have touched. Even on our town hall last night, there was a question about people playing tennis, and I went and actually looked up the answer to that. You can't even play tennis with someone outside your family because you're touching the ball. You're each touching the ball, and that is not allowed. So different times, and so this is our different measure for these different times if you're interested in it.
Okay, I have, thank you, Madam City Manager. I have one question on the resolution. I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to ask it in advance of the meeting, so I think it's probably for the city attorney. Is this resolution, though, when I read it, is it for suspending the fee or allowing the use of plastic bags, or both? And did we consider just suspending the fee, or is this just takes away the prohibition of multi-use bags? Because I think there's two different things going on, right?
Right. The way the resolution is drafted, it just suspends the entirety of the chapter. What we did in 2013 was adopt the county's protocol for single-use bags, carry-out bags. And in light of the purposes of this, the proposed resolution would just suspend enforcement of that chapter in its entirety during the declared emergency and for 30 days thereafter, so that there's an opportunity to communicate and ramp back up. It doesn't mean that individual grocers have to provide single-use bags or other pharmacies and restaurants and so on. It just means that they would not be subject to penalties for doing so. And so the idea is to just have kind of a clean break and hit pause on all of the parts of the county's protocol on this, and then resume it when the danger of transmission has eased.
Okay, thank you for that clarification on the resolution. I see the Vice Mayor has a question.
Yes, I think I need a little more clarification. So in the staff report, it does say staff recommends temporarily suspending the charge for single-use bags. So to me, if residents read that, they're going to think that they can go to the grocery store and they won't be charged that 25 cents. So have we reached out to the Grocers Association and chambers and so forth?
We haven't yet. No, we wanted to bring it to you to see if it was something of interest to you. Because we had this opportunity with this special council meeting, we just brought it now. We're working in just-in-time service.
Okay, so then how do we work it then if people are going to the stores now and saying that, let's say the council approved this resolution, I don't have to pay the 25 cents?
So we'll have to let all the stores know as soon as we can, which would be tomorrow.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure that the community understands that we need to do the outreach first and make sure everything's okay before we implement.
And presumably, I'm just pulling up the reso. You could have it effective. Because it doesn't have an effective date.
Yeah.
If I may, I think that that process is one that the different vendors can work out for themselves, and what it's probably going to amount to is that they'll want to have some little signage or something at the checkout saying, you know, that we can help them with, that it's suspended or not. It may be that, you know, a particular vendor has adjusted their supply chain in such a way that they don't have ready access to single-use bags anymore, and they may need to do something different. It's not a mandate that they hand out single-use bags for free. It's an opportunity for them to do that, which was their default way of doing business at the time that the county took this action.
And
So if we, sorry, Mayor.
no.
So if we implement this, it may be good to put the website or e-news that it will be up to the individual grocers on whether this is, if they implement that.
We can certainly do that.
Thank you.
And then just to further clarify, when you say it's really up to them, Madam City Attorney, they could continue to charge if they want. It's their choice, correct? Because
right.
They don't. It is totally applicable. It's just that we will not enforce a penalty if they don't.
Right.
Okay. All right.
That's exactly correct.
We have another question from Councilmember Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I just want to say I really don't get this one. We are actually using our own bags and bagging our own groceries to avoid other people touching them, which seems a little better to me. So I'm missing something here. So the whole thing about other bags is actually seems a little worse than using our own. So we're going to continue to do this.
Thank you for the comment. And Councilmember Coulson.
So mine is similar to Councilman Ortiz, which is, I guess, is the point that they, I think what is the point that they don't want other people bringing bags in that may be contaminated, setting them on the counter, putting groceries in, then the counter's contaminated, then leaving. So to me, if the point is that we don't want people bringing their own bags in, then to me, the way you do it is you say you're not allowed to bring your bags in. Like you can't anymore like you can't, maybe 2 weeks before, you couldn't go to Starbucks and bring your own cup anymore. When you go in there, they tell you we aren't allowed to take your own cup. You have to use our cups. So I guess I'm confused. Is this a situation that's just, I'm just saying that's what Starbucks' policy was, is they don't want their people touching a cup that you maybe drank out of, didn't clean it well enough, and then they contaminate their hands, then they're contaminating all the other people's cups. So they prohibited it. So I guess that's what I'm trying to understand. Are we trying to prevent bags from coming in or not? Because if that's the true goal, then the real issue should be you're not allowed to bring your bags in.
I think with this, the reso and this, as city manager said, this came up sort of in real time, minutes before the packet was published. But basically, the reso is designed to just take the city out of it. So a particular business can decide for itself, if this reso passes, a particular business can decide for itself what it needs to do to keep its people safe. But what we're doing with the reso is saying the city's not going to put the thumb on the scale and fine you or charge you if you fail to allow people to use reusable bags, or if you fail to charge. So it's basically to just remove us from the equation. Each business can decide for itself what its protocols should be. And there may be some where they're very well set up to, you know, handle that cross-contamination issue, and others that are less comfortable with it.
So it kind of sounds like, if I'm summarizing, in the Starbucks example, where Starbucks made the decision you can't bring your reusable in, this would allow grocery stores or pharmacies or whoever to make that decision and not be fined or charged or required to make people pay if they bring their own bags or they don't bring their own bags. It would sort of, yeah, like you said, take the city out of it. It's an interesting question, and I think it's not super clear cut, and there's a confusion when we change course and change behaviors, but it's certainly a reasonable at a time of emergency, it could very well be a reasonable measure to let there be more flexibility. I should have probably waited to say that until we have some deliberation on it. But do we have any other questions from council members before we open up to public comment on this?
Can I just make a comment on this?
Sure.
So this is not a burning hill to die on for your staff. We're trying to be responsive to email that came in and offered a suggestion. So if there's just a lot of discomfort around it, I would just as soon say we should move on, because you do have a 7:30 hard stop, and it sounded like you had some kind of bigger fish to fry. So with that, you may have public comment on it, but it's not something that, you know, we will feel like we worked really hard on it if you decide that it's just not something you want to go forward with.
Yeah, because
we did work hard, but we're okay with that.
It's just removing part of the code at this point. Okay, so unless colleagues object, I'm going to open up to public comment on this to see if anybody wants to weigh in. Madam City Clerk, do we have any comments?
There are no comments.
Okay. Seeing none, colleagues, deliberation, comfort with removing this requirement in the code during this state of emergency. I see Councilmember Colson, I don't know if you waved your hand or if you're.
Come on. Okay, I'm actually comfortable passing this resolution. I'll make a motion. If it fails, it's okay, guys, but I thought we should just try to deal with it. So I'll make a motion to accept the staff report and the resolution to remove this part of the ordinance for now and allow individual businesses to determine what works best for them.
Okay.
Second, I think that's the right rationale. Let each business figure it out for the time being and then revert once the crisis is behind us.
Okay. All right. It can I guess we have a motion and a second, and we'll take a roll call vote.
Councilmember Colson?
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg?
Aye.
Councilmember Ortiz?
Yes.
Vice Mayor O'Brien?
Yes.
Mayor Beach?
Yes. All right, motion passes unanimously. So thanks for considering that. And you're right, we do have a couple other items to cover tonight, so we'll move on. Is this one for Madam City Manager or Madam City Attorney? What are we discussing next? A discussion of measures to address eviction. So this again has been many of us have received inquiries from constituents, both from the residential side and from the business side. There's been some bold action taken by the County of San Mateo. There's been a executive order from the governor, but there's some confusion around what that really meant. So this is an opportunity for is this the city attorney's item here?
This is Madam City Attorney, who was very involved with County Council in figuring this one out.
All right, and so because there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of questions, this is an opportunity to clarify some of those questions, and then if council wants to further discuss or deliberate, we can. So thank you, Madam City Attorney.
Sure, and I will keep this actually very short because I think that the council has some real policy questions to discuss in terms of other aspects of the city's response, but just for everyone's, so that we're all on the same page. Obviously, this emergency and the shelter-in-place order that it generated has had immediate and, in some cases, really devastating economic effects on a lot of households and businesses in our region. And there are a number of people who don't have significant cash cushions to deal with their hours being cut back or being furloughed or laid off or not able to work during the shelter-in-place. And so that becomes an immediate problem for a lot of people when it comes to rent and mortgage payments. But rent was the one that was the focus of these discussions. So there was quite a bit of back and forth about how to deal with that problem. Working with the county, we ended up coming to the conclusion that the county was really the appropriate place to deal with the question of residential displacement because they were the ones who had issued the shelter-in-place order under their public health powers. And it's very hard to shelter in place if your shelter has been taken from you and you've been evicted into the street. So there was a direct nexus there, and the Board of Supervisors, County Council worked very hard, and the Board of Supervisors passed an eviction moratorium to deal with residential evictions. As part of that analysis, the county determined that they were not the appropriate place to deal with mortgages because of the sort of heavily federal nature of those arrangements, and they didn't have the ability to kind of insert themselves there from a preemption perspective to the same degree that they did with residential rent. The evictions question also affects businesses, businesses that have been shuttered or whose business has been significantly curtailed during this emergency. Obviously, many of them have the same problem making rent that individuals do. But the issue there is that there's less of a direct nexus to the public health portion of the county's powers to address that. It's the economic impacts are substantial, but it doesn't involve the displacement of families onto the street and the loss of shelter. And so that's the reason that the county didn't take direct action countywide as part of their health order on commercial evictions as opposed to residential evictions. Everyone acknowledges the impact of those, but and in some ways their follow-on effects may be as severe, but they're not as directly actionable as the question of someone's shelter. So that's the action that the county took. We did work with them on that approach, and my personal opinion is that it's really good to have a uniform countywide approach on the question of residential evictions, particularly when you have kind of a patchwork of other approaches. We have some rent control jurisdictions. You have Burlingame that has the Measure T ordinance that we're all familiar with that could impact the way that we approach things. So it's good to have that uniformity. So that's where we are on the top level. The mayor mentioned the governor's order. The governor has issued a few orders where the press release doesn't necessarily match what's in the content of the order. So, for example, there was a press release that said that he's stopped evictions until May 31st, and that's not what the order did. The order pushed the question down to localities without taking responsibility for the question of, potential exposure under various lawsuit theories and so on. So it's worth reading the order itself rather than the press release when it comes to things coming out of Sacramento and DC. So I think the reason why this was relevant is, first of all, we didn't know when the agenda was put together what the county's action was going to be. I'm very gratified that they did take that action. I think it will protect a number of families in the short term here. And then I think on the question of commercial evictions, given that they're harder to address through the same kind of mechanism, that ties back into the council's earlier discussion and the broader discussion of what actions the city can and wants to take to support local business.
All right. Thank you for that overview, Madam City Attorney. I see Councilmember Brownrigg has a question.
Thanks. Actually, more of a comment. So, one, I want to more explicitly commend our city attorney for the work that she did with county general counsel and the other city attorneys to make that happen. She did a lot of work to get the group to a consensus, and we are much better off with a single uniform approach in this county. And Kathleen doesn't take enough credit for the work that she does sometimes. So I want to be express about the importance of that, and I think the wisdom of that approach. I also want to point out, because in this time of crisis, there are trade-offs that we have to make, and that's why one is in a leadership position you have to make decisions. And so there is obviously potential disruption to landowners, but on that score, I'm gratified to see that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have both said they will not foreclose on mortgages if the underlying landowner has had rent cash flow problems as a result of coronavirus. So I think the system widely is trying its best to make sure that contracts entered into in healthy economic times don't ruin either individuals or businesses in this really bizarre time. So those are really by way of two comments. I do think, and this will address the second part of Kathleen's comments, I do think we need to look at being more robust in supporting our small business community here in Burlingame. I do worry a lot about not just winning the war against the virus, but winning the peace that comes after. And I was struck by the city of Sacramento that took their ordinance, which did what the county did with respect to residential evictions. And by the way, as I think we all know, but just for the record, this isn't a rent forgiveness, this is a rent deferral. You are required to pay the back rent, whatever you can't pay within, well, I forget now, Kathleen, Sacramento was 4 months, but within some period of time, you have to make up the back rent. And so what the city of Sacramento did was take that same concept and apply it to commercial tenants. And so if commercial tenants could show their business had been harmed by the restrictions, then they were also able to, they should pay what they could, but could roll forward any additional balance to be repaid within 4 months. And, I think there are other approaches that we can look at, but I'm definitely willing to look at a robust response to help our business community bounce back as quickly as possible.
Thank you for the comment, Councilmember Brownrigg. Madam City Attorney, do you have some questions on other cities and their actions related to this commercial eviction notice? And actually I have one other update. There was a press release. The governor made a statement. I forwarded it to our city attorney and city clerk, but I'm sorry, city attorney and city manager. I'm not sure if it's been fully vetted, but the Chronicle did report this afternoon that the governor was working with some major banks beyond Fannie and Freddie, but Wells Fargo was named, I think JP Morgan Chase, that they're working with mortgage holders for, I believe it was like 90-day pause.
I have some information on that if you'd like, and it actually came from the governor. So it was confirmed. So he reached agreement with Wells Fargo, Citi, JP Morgan, US Bank, and nearly 200 state chartered banks, credit unions, and servicers. They've all agreed to a 90-day grace period for mortgage payments for those impacted by COVID-19. So that's good news.
It is good news, although Bank of America and some other banks are notably missing from that list. So it's not universal, but it sounds like a lot of the big players are on there. But I do want to give the city attorney an opportunity to respond to Councilmember Brownrigg's comment about some other cities' actions.
Yes, and obviously these are different cities take different approaches and have different constraints. Some cities that are charter cities have sort of a different kind of home rule factor than we do. Other cities also that don't have the Measure T problem that we do in addressing with some evictions have a little more freedom to respond to things in a more sort of direct manner in terms of enacting moratoria. But that in this case with the residential one, the lid is on with the residential evictions, and I think that gives the city the opportunity to really turn to the question of how to interact with our local businesses in a way that's genuinely supportive of them. We don't need to engage in months of analysis in order to start taking steps on that as well. That one of the issues that sometimes people bring up as a concern is the question of sort of a gift of public funds. But I think that any sort of structure that involves the city doing some sort of bridge loan, zero interest loan, so on, as an economic development thing, that's something that we could easily articulate in terms of the public purpose for that. Really the requirement there is that it be an open and accessible program that people understand the criteria for and can apply for. So if that's something that the city was interested in doing or assistance in negotiating with landlords, or there are a number of different approaches that we could take that keep us on strong legal footing, but are still of direct benefit to our businesses, because clearly they're the lifeblood here of the city's economy. And we do have a number of smaller and more sort of individual, less broadly corporate businesses that are very important in the city, and they don't necessarily have the deep cash resources to weather a situation like this that some of the larger multinationals would.
Thank you. I don't see their hands up right now with council, but I do have one question, and I know that I'm not the only member of the council. I gather from our town hall comments and other conversations that other council members are certainly talking with property owners, with landlords, with businesses. I have not personally heard of any business that is being evicted for non-payment of rent. I have heard a number of stories of property owners working with businesses actively to try to work through, obviously, cash flow issues and payment plans. Have colleagues or anybody else encountered different information? That would be my question to colleagues. And I do see that the Vice Mayor has her hand up, so maybe she has some additional comments or questions. Sorry. Vice Mayor. I think you need to unmute.
Sorry. Yeah, I actually have the same question. I wanted to know if people have heard that there have been issues. I'm definitely, concerned about the small businesses, but I actually have not received any phone calls or emails on this as of yet. So I'm wondering if the tenants are working with the landlords and they're coming to conclusions of what will work. So I'd like to hear from my other colleagues.
Okay, I see that Councilmember Ortiz had his hand up first, and then afterwards we'll go to Councilmember Colson.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, I just want to always, when I'm talking about these things, think about that we will be on the other side of this at one point, that this is temporary. So Councilmember, Vice Mayor O'Brien's question, I haven't heard of anybody being evicted, but I have heard of many businesses whose income has completely shut down, and they may be able to pay their April 1st, but if we extend this to another month, I suspect we're going to be hearing a lot more stories of people not being able to pay their rent. So having said that, I think we need to step up and come up with a way to help these people in the short term. There's a few things that we had discussed. I had a conversation with Councilmember Brownrigg, and I think we had a framework of something that I think we should pursue, and I'd love to talk about that a little further, but not specific instances of evictions, but really, really difficult times.
Yeah, definitely a lot of fear out there. Councilmember Colson.
Yes, so I have spoken to a variety of both landlords and tenants, and no one has, as you confirm, Mayor Beach, indicated that they're getting an eviction notice.
And you're talking about commercial, right?
Commercial, all commercial, all on the commercial side. But I did receive an email today from a tenant, a commercial tenant, who said that they feel they may, they feel very strongly that the council should put a moratorium on evictions. I'm not advocating one way or another. I'm just saying that's the first one that I received, which said, the council should step up and do that. My concern with that is that, from what I hear, the landlords and the tenants seem to be negotiating amongst themselves and figuring it out. I'm a little concerned to get us involved in the middle of it if they seem to be doing a good job. If I hear that 2 or 3 businesses are going to get evicted, then I would be more inclined to put an emergency meeting together or an emergency ordinance together and mirror the residential and put a halt to all the evictions. But I think the tenants in some cases are actually getting a better deal. They're actually getting rent deferral or rent declines, rent reductions, rent deferrals, or rent abatements, complete rent abatements. So I hate to step in the middle of that because it seems like it's working, So that's just my observations and what I'm hearing from the market.
Thanks for the comments on that. Councilmember Brownrigg.
I guess my concern about it is if we wait for people to be evicted, then we're way past the ability to do anything meaningful. There are not thousands and thousands and thousands of renters like we have residentially. There are, 100 small businesses. And the thing that we've all been in business, what you're doing is you're not worried about making the end of month. You're thinking about the next month and the month after that, and how are you going to pay yourself, and how are you going to pay your employees, and how are you going to pay your vendors, and you're making decisions. And so, they're deciding now, like Councilman Ortiz says, they have April 1 threat. They're wondering if they can make April 30. And if they're not going to make April 30, then they're just going to shut down. So they won't get evicted. They'll just quit. And I think the reason to do something, and I will say that there are two different ideas. One idea is to follow City of Sacramento, which says, we're going to put a moratorium on paying rent and let you pay it over the next 4 months after the order's over. That's one approach. Another approach is what Councilman Ortiz talked about, and also the city attorney, and that's putting together a fund and helping with bridge loans, right? Those are two different approaches. I think either one could work. They're, by the way, not mutually exclusive. But the point is, I think the city needs to be robust in showing we're trying to help the merchants because they will otherwise just plan to leave. It won't be about evictions. It'll be about they're not coming back.
Appreciate the comment. I also think it's worth clarifying. There was one other piece of information that's become clear on the daily county calls of electeds, but make sure the public's aware as well. I'll have the city manager, maybe the city attorney, speak to processing of evictions right now in the county. My understanding there's as far as if the sheriffs are serving, and then the courts. Can you give us the lay of the land of how evictions would even be processed or not processed?
Sure. Well, the unlawful detainer schedule for the Superior Court has been suspended, and that's the mechanism by which an eviction is completed. So they're not hearing those cases right now during the pendency of the shelter-in-place order, although I should note that the courts are independent of the county, and so they really take their orders from the state Supreme Court. And it was just, I think, yesterday or day before that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court suspended county trials and so on, jury trials and so on. So it's not necessarily uniform as to when these calendars would resume. And then the sheriff is not enforcing eviction orders right now in terms of actually locking people out of their units. I believe, with the exception that if a tenant is posing a threat to somebody else, or that kind of situation, that might be one that escalates, but just sort of generic evictions are not being processed. The thing to remember, though, is that a lot of people leave without a formal eviction process. So while the court's process is not going forward, a number of tenants, either residential or commercial, respond to that notice, pay rent or quit notice, and they leave, or they have a discussion with their property manager and leave without going through the formal process. So the formal process is on hold, but that really applies to those tenants who don't leave voluntarily when there's a discussion with a property manager or a landlord.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, other questions before we open this up to public comment? All right. Also, can you give a little bit, you mentioned also we've got another, I certainly don't think we have any legislation to consider here tonight. This is more a discussion, which we welcome all public comments on this matter of evictions, whether it's residential or commercial. But I don't think we're proposing, we are not prepared to legislate anything tonight, but what will come back after public comment is to deliberate what are next steps or questions to help businesses and in what way. And it sounds like we have some momentum to deploy a subcommittee on this to look at solutions. But I think there's also a question I have before we open to public comment. You mentioned Measure T has some additional, a layer of complication. I know Redwood City considered commercial evictions and decided to wait and see, is my understanding. They did not legislate anything. The city of San Mateo is a charter city, so they're a little bit different than us. Maybe you can, I don't know if that's relevant, but they decided to extend to commercial evictions in big cities like Sacramento, I think San Francisco. But we have Measure T, which adds a layer for us. Can you elaborate a little bit on that for us?
Sure, and as the council is very familiar, but the public may not be if they're watching this later, Measure T was a measure that was written and adopted by the voters in 1987. And it's actually quite simple in that it says that the city council, the city government, can't set the sale or rental price of any real estate parcel, basically, of any real estate unit. Its simplicity then creates some ambiguity about how it applies in various situations. And so without saying that it would or would not bar any particular action, especially since we don't have direction to look into that yet, it is one of those things that we can anticipate that people can and do raise that as an impediment to various things that the council has considered over the years in terms of addressing affordable housing or other issues whenever something that the council does gets close to the heart of the purpose of Measure T. We hear from its original drafters and its ongoing proponents in terms of whether the city can take that action. Basically, any action that's taken by the voters can only be undone by the voters, so the council cannot on its own power override Measure T. It's something that would have to go to the voters to do. In this case, there's the question of whether a temporary moratorium would in fact be the kind of action that would violate that. I think we would need to look very carefully at the legislative history, such as it is for Measure T, and that's something that we would evaluate much more closely if the council gives direction to go that way. There are also concerns about the constitutionality of a temporary taking, which is basically where you're telling a landlord that they have to have someone in their unit that they don't want there during the time that you're saying that they have to have them and that they can't charge rent for it. So those are issues that each city or county that's doing this has to navigate and decide for themselves. The charter powers that certain cities, larger cities in San Mateo have do, as a matter of home rule, kind of create more authority in the city government than we have as a general law city. That's kind of an esoteric issue, but there is a reason why some cities can do more than we can in certain fields. And that relates to that question of their fundamental structure.
Okay. All right. Let's see if members of unless colleagues have any other questions, let's see then, I see none. Let's see if members of the public wish to speak on this item. We do have a few people tuned in with us tonight.
There are no comments.
No comments. All right. We'll give everybody just another pause in case they want to. Okay.
No.
All right, seeing none. Who of colleagues would like to make a comment? Vice Mayor Keegren. O'Brien, I'm sorry, Vice Mayor O'Brien Keegren. Vice Mayor? Oh, I don't know if we lost you or mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. So since we're not making a decision on the legislation per se tonight, I think it would be helpful maybe to get the Sacramento legislation and the San Mateo legislation and see what they did, and any other cities that Kathleen might be able to get the templates. Also, I think it would be beneficial, if possible, that we can have our Joe from our economic development make phone calls to property owners and tenants to see if they're actually working on this between themselves, or are we seeing maybe for a month from now, there is going to be an issue, or 2 weeks from now, it'll be an issue. If we're going to be meeting every 2 weeks, I think we'll be discussing this soon enough. But I would kind of like to know whether or not tenants and landlords are already working this out on their own.
Thank you for that comment. I had the opportunity to talk with two of the bigger property owners that are family run, that own significant real estate on Burlingame Avenue, which certainly doesn't include everybody, because there's some folks, as the public may not recognize, there's a hodgepodge. There's some big owners, and then there's some folks that just own one building here and there. It seems like there's a lot of working things out and case by case basis, that some of the property owners, the property owners that I spoke with are deeply invested in keeping Burlingame Avenue thriving and alive and well. And they want to see if they do evict, who in the world would they show the property to? How would they get another business in? I think the bigger fear that I heard was that there are some businesses that are healthy and have some reserves, and this is devastating, but they can work with them, and they're going to work through this. And with resources from SAMCETA and small business loans, they're going to cobble it together and keep businesses going. There's other businesses that are on the margins. On the margins, maybe their business model wasn't working great. Maybe their customer base left them for online sales. Maybe they're new, they just started, they don't have the reserves. Those are precarious businesses. They may not make it through even if they get a rent deferral. But they're really trying to look on a case-by-case basis to make this work. I did hear from a business owner today that they're lucky, they've got good landlords, but they've heard through the grapevine that other landlords are concerned and not really talking much because they were waiting to see what's happening with the mortgage industry. And because it's not that the landlords wanted to, they need to make decisions based on their obligations as well. So it's a really complex web, and I think there's some members of this council that understand it, including you, Vice Mayor, far better than I do. But there's a lot of good faith effort. I do second that opinion of trying to understand if there's a problem we need to solve and what that looks like. If there's a way, I don't know if staff thinks it's a good idea to set up an email, evictions@burlingame.org, so we can get feedback and try to collect data for commercial. Is that happening, so we can understand how to address it and maybe work with it offline? That would be an interesting thing as well. But I do concur that if staff can do some legwork and try to understand what's going on out there as well. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much, and I see Councilmember Ortiz has a comment as we're deliberating.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And again, this is from a conversation that I had earlier with Councilmember Brownrigg. I agree completely with what Councilmember or Vice Mayor O'Brien said regarding the landlords. It's in their best interest to make this work this out and get to the other side with these tenants. So what we were talking about was creating a fund to help that along, to help that negotiation, and maybe add a little deferred, add a short-term bridge loan to help the landlords if they agree to defer the portion of the rents. Then we would put that into the equation. And again, if this goes for any longer, we're going to be talking about a lot more trouble for these businesses. And I think it's important that we look at some solutions. I think that makes sense because everybody's got skin in the game, and we keep these businesses viable until we get to the other side. And so I would like to explore that.
Thank you, Councilmember Ortiz. Councilmember Brownrigg.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I endorse kind of all of the above. I would suggest that it would be useful. That time is of the essence. Like I said a minute ago, when you're running a small business, especially one that is with very thin margins, or where you're actually, bankrolling it yourself from your savings because you haven't quite made a profit, you're deciding now whether you're going to be in business in May. It's not going to be about evictions. It's going to be about whether you open up whenever the order gets lifted. And so conveying to the community, the business community, that we are trying to help them is, I think, a really important message. So if we're going to regroup in 2 weeks, I would really strongly like us to have a package ready to go and be discussed and hopefully approved. Maybe not every item, maybe it's a menu of items and we don't do them all. But if we don't hit the 2 week mark, we might as well not do anything, because again, people will be making their decisions. And I, notwithstanding I've heard that point too, there's some people who are super healthy and there are other people who are on the edge. Well, that is, welcome to business. That's always the way. And what we're trying to do is help people make a decision to keep gutting it out. It's no point if somebody's going to fold to help them stay in business 2 weeks longer. But if having a rent deferral or having a bridge loan helps them stay in business for 2 more years, that is worth it. So anyway, I do think it makes sense to have a committee that works as soon as possible and fleshes these different ideas out. I'm happy for it to be a noticed committee. In other words, it doesn't have to get limited to 2 council members, because there's a lot of talent on council. But speed is of the essence, and I think creativity is important. And the good news is, especially if we go down the financial support route, we are in a position where we can be creative financially. We are blessed with having been fiscally prudent for years and years. So anyway, I do think it's urgent. I think getting out the other side of this is important, and sending a signal to the business community that we're going to help them. We're not just going to wait for them to get evicted and then, hope that they get, 2 weeks extra time. That's not what they need. It's not the residential model. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg. I see Councilmember Colson has a comment. We can't hear you, so if you could.
Sorry, in speaking to a number of the businesses, about the restaurant, I think there's even a more nuanced situation going on with the restaurants versus the hard goods people. And the restaurants problem that they have is, to be frank, a lot of their employees can't go collect unemployment insurance, aren't covered with, and there's a lot of complications around immigration status. So it creates a more complicated situation for them. And what I think on the restaurants, what I've been told is most of them can get through 30 days. They'll have to think about their business, but 60 days would probably put them out of business. And certainly 90 days, 12 weeks would be complete death to them. So I do agree that the timing situation is really important. If we were to, the eviction question to me is relevant. I just don't see landlords wanting to they know they can't get another business. For God's sake, they can't even get a permit for the next 3 months probably, because the permits you can't, even if they could lease it. And I know these things are taking like 1 year to 2 years to lease. So they're going to try to work with their tenants. But I guess there's a difference between telling people we're going to let you defer all your rent. Some of them may not need that. Some may be getting rent abatements, which a rent abatement is even better than a rent deferral. Some of them, their landlords are saying, you don't have to pay rent for this month and next month, or I'll give you all of April free. So I am loath to get into the middle of that negotiation, to having the council say, well, you should defer rent or this or that. The only piece I would be interested in is saying, hey, could we not kick anybody out until at least the end of this thing when the governor lifts it? Then you could do your regular process without getting into the financial conversation around it. Let them handle their own finances. That would be the only thing that could potentially help. But it goes to the secondary point, the underlying, which is even if we held their eviction up, they're probably just not going to be able, more people are going to leave because they can't run the business than are going to get evicted. That's for sure. So we've got to work quickly over the next week and put a package together. And I would suggest if we can't even get one together in a week, we try to meet in a week instead of 2 weeks. And then if we need to go to 2 weeks. So maybe that's the solution.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I concur that a package of assistance somehow of supporting businesses is the first order of business. I mean, stepping back even further, what I'm hearing from all folks on these sides, whether it's businesses, business owners, residents, government officials, people, everybody just wishes we could pause all these economic issues while we are all on pause, but we don't have the power to do that. We can't, there's mortgage issues, it's just such a massive challenge, but we've got to figure out what action we can take. If we're going to do anything, I do agree if we can meet in the next week, I'll work with staff on that to analyze some kind of a package. That probably makes sense. If we are going to consider, I would love to see some data that evictions are an issue before we insert ourselves there, because I have heard on county-wide calls that there is a legitimate legal question about constitutionality of staying evictions for commercial. And I'd like to hear an analysis of emergency powers and constitutionality. And I'd also like to hear it about how Measure T fits in there. I want to make sure whatever we're doing is legal to do if we had to do something. So maybe, but the first order of business that we know we can do is what kind of a package can we put together to support our Burlingame businesses. I think there's a lot of value. Things are moving so quickly with what the governor announced with mortgage relief. That is going to take some of the pressure off landlords as well. That could be stepped even further from what we're hearing from our state delegation, state representatives, that there could be even more orders on evictions coming from the governor under executive order, and then that takes us out of legal risk. So that could develop in the next week or so. And I do think that bridge loans could be really powerful. I think SAMCETA and their San Mateo County Strong Fund could be a really useful tool also, but if there's stuff we can do locally, that's good. I also don't want to lose sight of the fact, and I don't know how this quite fits in, but if we're doing all these packages for businesses, there's going to come a point where our residents that are taking a breather right now, who have been protected by the county order, they still have rent coming due. And what we do for businesses has a lot of benefit for the community too, but we have to also bear in mind that there's going to be a lot of people who at different times we've talked about using some housing impact fees to help with emergency rental assistance, that there could be some needs too from our residential community. And there's just so many needs that are so insurmountable, but we do have to go forward with how can we help the business community right now as well, because they're the folks that are not protected under anything. It looks like we have some momentum with a subcommittee that's forming our chamber folks, Councilmember Colson and Councilmember Brownrigg. I know we also have an economic development subcommittee. Colleagues, I just want to offer up, think about people's bandwidth and opportunity to help put something together. Are there any volunteers who would like to continue pursuing what our package might look like in the next week ahead? It looks like we have a lot of volunteers. So do we want to do 3 or 2 staff? What do you recommend? It looks like we have Colson, Brownrigg, and Ortiz. Or do we need to be more limber and just keep it at 2 so that it's ultimately flexible?
I mean, 2 is easier for scheduling purposes, but we can schedule a Brown Act meeting. You may have other people there, which is fine. Each member of the council who's volunteered has different expertise to bear, so it can really go either way. But if you all want us to come back in a week, then we all have to be really available to have these meetings. And scheduling meetings and having them noticed and everything, all of that,
All right.
takes time. All of it takes time.
I think what we're going to do is stick with, since we've got some momentum with Brownrigg and Colson on this, to pursue trying to put together a package. The goal will be in the next week or so. And let's leave it at that for now. And if we reconsider that, I'll let you know. I think we need to be nimble right now.
Our next council meeting is only about a week and a half away also. So, time is ticking just to get to a regular council meeting. So we're losing a couple of days if we can't make a meeting in a week. Okay.
And I would encourage members of the community. Oh wait, I see some comments here from colleagues, but the last thing I'll say, we need full-on communication with our businesses and our property owners to help us understand the lay of the land. So please communicate with us, particularly with these two members of the subcommittee, Councilmember Brownrigg and Colson. You can copy the whole city council as well to keep information flowing about the situation so that we can really respond appropriately. Councilmember Colson.
So what I might suggest is that if Councilman Brownrigg and I start and lay out a framework, and then we're doing some other work to try to maybe look at budgeting. If there does get into modeling around lending and loans and kind of a loan structure program, Ricardo's really good at that.
Yes.
So if it sort of changes tactics, Lisa, we could absolve the one and then hand it off to him with either, and I think Anne's working on it from the county level. She's helping develop the actual forms and guidance and criteria by which, if you're evaluating through the county, and we might want to use something like that to just mirror it so we don't reinvent the wheel and people are consistent in applications. So maybe that's a way to handle it. We start, and then as it emerges and sort of solutions emerge, we can morph it to get everyone involved.
Okay. Councilmember Brownrigg.
Thanks. I'm comfortable with that outcome, and I think we do have to be nimble, and I think we can find ways to make that happen. I want to make a broader point just before we break up, which is, it is helpful to me to be on these county-wide calls. I appreciate that. I appreciate the mayor and the city manager running point with the county. I have real concerns about social cohesion if the shelter-in-place thing gets extended beyond April 7th, which every indication is that it will. And I especially have concerns if you start seeing a very different direction coming out of Washington. And so the solution to that is that I think it's going to become even, right now I think you have real public buy-in to all of these restrictions. And we all know there's an enormous amount of pain coming our way economically. And I mean, we're looking at a significant hit. I mean, that's just inevitable. But everyone's willing to make the sacrifice, like wartime. But there's going to come a point, especially if other parts of the country are going in a different direction, where people will need to be reminded or reconvinced about this, and where businesses to make a different decision. So I just want to ask that you guys who interact with the county, that second extension is going to require a lot of justification. And I'm concerned about, right now our cops will roll to a couple of teenagers who are congregating because we've told people that's what they should do, and then people break up. But that's when everybody agrees that this is the right way to handle it. If there begins to become a split in public opinion about it, it'll be much more different. And so I just am trying to end with a wider plea that we justify the extension much better than just pointing at Northern Italy.
Thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg. These are long, one of the major points that I tried to make on a county call, and I'm very careful about when I speak up, but that the data and the modeling and helping us understand to the community, to help us explain to the community why these measures are in place, and exactly to your point, if they step up, why we have to do it, so critically important. I agree wholeheartedly. With that, I think Madam City Manager, do you have the direction that you need as far as our sort of action plan for the next meeting?
More or less, I'll be working with council members Brownrigg and Colson at the outset to try to flesh out something, and I'll pull in members of my team as needed, and then we will punt over to Vice Mayor O'Brien and Councilmember Ortiz at the relevant point if that becomes necessary. And we'll try to do all of this in a timely fashion to get back to you, and we'll just see how we do. We'll do our best.
Yep.
I do want to remind you that you are now over time on this
Yep.
meeting, and you have your planning commissioner interviews, and you have your first person probably waiting on a different Zoom call. So I'll just leave you with that.
All right. Well, with that, I think what we will do is adjourn momentarily. But before we do, we want to thank members of the community who are here with us for tuning in, for participating. Keep us posted on your thoughts on this. Keep us posted on how we can support you. And remember, please adhere to the shelter-in-place order. Wash hands. Be kind. We will get through this together. We're all in it together. We are rowing in the same direction. And any of you would like to join in, we will be doing Planning Commission interviews momentarily. So thank you all for being with us. We're adjourned 7:30 p.m. Amen. Thanks. Okay.
Good. And Madam Mayor, I sent you a message. I've been advised to not participate in this